Hello everyone, welcome back to The Sleepy Crime. This is the 58th story we're diving into, and we are so excited to have you here with us. Today's stories are The Heir Who Disappeared Without a Trace, The Murder with a Silent Witness, The Convicted Killer Who Claimed Innocence. It's been an amazing journey so far, and we couldn't do it without your support. Your comments, your suggestions, they mean the world to us. If you have any ideas or directions you want us to explore, don't hesitate to leave us a message in the comments. We're a small team, but with every day, our family grows bigger. So, a huge thank you to all of you who are tuning in. It's your engagement that fuels our passion for bringing new stories to life. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It means a lot to us, and you'll never miss an episode of the incredible tales we're putting together for you. Our team of 3 is working hard every single day to research, prepare, and present these stories to you, and we're thrilled that you're a part of this journey with us. One quick request from us. Can you tell us where you're tuning in from? And if you don't mind, let us know what time it is in your part of the world right now. It's always fun for us to see where you're listening from and what time zone you're in. We really enjoy reading your comments, so please share that with us. All right, enough of the chit-chat. Let's dive right into our latest tale. Are you ready for a thrilling and captivating story? Here we go. The rain came down in sheets, as though the sky itself had turned against the city. Streets that had once been bustling with life now appeared desolate, bathed in the glow of the occasional passing car. It was the kind of night that felt like a prelude to something sinister, something inevitable. And for Detective Elise Carter, it was just the beginning of a story that would unravel a family's darkest secrets. Elise had been working in the city's homicide division for over 5 years, but nothing had quite prepared her for the case she was about to dive into. It all started with a phone call, a tip. No name, no introduction, just a cryptic message that would send her running. The heir is missing. The family knows, but they're hiding it. You need to get to the mansion, now. That was all Elise needed. The voice had been anonymous, but the urgency was unmistakable. She grabbed her jacket and rushed out the door, already piecing together the information in her head. The Randall family, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the city, had been in the news often, but not for anything related to crime. They were a respected name, their business empire spanning several industries. Everyone knew about the Randall fortune. What they didn't know, however, was that there were cracks in their perfect facade, and now one of their own was missing. Elise arrived at the Randall mansion shortly after midnight. The estate loomed in the distance like a shadow. The mansion's grand, towering silhouette barely visible through the fog that had settled in. The gates were locked, and she had to ring the intercom to be let in. The sound of the gate opening echoed through the otherwise silent air. When she stepped onto the property, the feeling of unease only grew. The mansion's windows, usually glowing with the warmth of home, were dark. The only light came from the distant porch, casting long shadows across the front yard. The place had an eerie stillness to it, like something was off-kilter. As she approached the door, Gerald Randall, the patriarch of the family, greeted her. His face was drawn, his eyes weary with the weight of a problem too large to handle on his own. "Detective Carter, thank you for coming," he said, his voice tight with stress. I don't know what to do. My daughter Isabella has vanished, and I'm afraid something terrible has happened to her. Elise stepped inside, scanning the mansion's entryway, taking in the opulent surroundings, grand staircases, marble floors, and priceless art that adorned the walls. But none of it mattered now. All that mattered was finding Isabella. "Tell me everything," Elise said, as she followed him into the sitting room. Gerald motioned to a chair and took a seat across from her. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in just a few days. His hands trembled as he folded them in his lap. "We had no idea anything was wrong until a few nights ago," he began. "Isabella has always been so difficult. You know, a free spirit. But she never disappeared like this before. At first, we thought she'd gone off on one of her trips. She does that sometimes. But when she didn't come home, I started getting worried, and now it's too late. She's gone." "Who else have you spoken to about this?" Elise asked. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to cause panic. But when the staff noticed she was missing, I knew it was time to contact the authorities. I was hoping you'd be able to help us find her." Elise noticed his hesitation. There was something more here, something he wasn't saying. But she didn't press him yet. Instead, she focused on the one thing that stuck with her. Isabella Randall was missing, and the sooner they found her, the better. "Where did she go last?" Elise asked, her tone professional but persistent. Gerald ran a hand through his thinning hair. "She went to meet someone, a man, but she didn't tell us who it was. She said she was working on something important. I didn't ask questions, but now I wish I had." "Do you have any idea where she could have gone? Any leads?" Elise pressed. Gerald shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No. But I have a feeling that whoever she was meeting, they're the reason she's gone." Elise stood up from the sitting room chair and motioned for Gerald to lead her further into the mansion. The dim light from the chandelier above cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to follow them as they moved down the hallway. Gerald led her toward a study. The door creaked open, revealing a room that looked as if it belonged to a man who had once ruled his world, lined with bookshelves, dark leather chairs, and rich, polished wood furniture. But it was the desk that caught her attention. Papers were strewn across it, some neatly stacked, others abandoned mid-thought. There was a half-open file with Isabella's name on it, just sitting there as though it had been left for someone to find. "Is this her personal file?" Elise asked as she moved toward the desk. Gerald's voice was quieter now. "Yes, that's Isabella's. I've been going through it, trying to make sense of things, but I haven't found anything useful. She never let us in on her life too much, but it seems like she was planning something important." Elise took the file in her hands and flipped it open. The first few pages were filled with personal information: her schooling, some travel itineraries, and a few scribbled notes that appeared to be from Isabella herself. But when Elise flipped to the final page, her breath caught. It was a note. A handwritten message that appeared to be hastily written, as though Isabella had scribbled it down in a rush. "The heir to the fortune is not what they seem. There's something wrong with my father. I've uncovered too much. They will come for me soon. Please don't trust them." Elise's heart began to race. This wasn't just about a missing person. This was something far more complicated, something dark and dangerous. Who was Isabella referring to when she said "they"? And why had she felt the need to leave behind this cryptic warning? She closed the file, her mind swirling with questions. "Gerald," she said, her voice firm, "we need to talk to everyone in this house. Every staff member, every family member. I believe Isabella knew something. Something that's putting her in danger?" Gerald nodded, but his face showed signs of strain. "I know, Detective, but I'm telling you, I don't think it's just about Isabella. There's something else going on here, and I can't shake the feeling that we're not just talking about a missing daughter anymore." Elise looked at him, her suspicions growing. Gerald's unease was palpable, and it was clear he was hiding something. "What do you mean? What aren't you telling me?" He hesitated for a long moment, then sighed deeply, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I was having an affair with someone from the board of directors, and I think she's part of this. Isabella may have found out." Elise's mind began piecing together the puzzle. This wasn't just a case of a spoiled heir who had run away from home. There was something much bigger going on. Family secrets, corruption, betrayal. "I need the names of everyone you've been involved with," Elise said, her voice unwavering. Gerald reluctantly pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and began listing names, his voice barely above a whisper. Each name that came from his lips was like another link in a chain, pulling them closer to the truth. Over the next few days, Elise and her team worked tirelessly, following every lead, questioning every person. But nothing was straightforward. Each step forward seemed to reveal two more questions. The first breakthrough came when they managed to track down Victor Grayson, the mysterious man Isabella had been meeting before her disappearance. Grayson was a businessman, charming, well-dressed, with an air of sophistication about him. But Elise's gut told her there was more to him than met the eye. She arranged a meeting with him at a local cafe, hoping to gain some insight into his connection to Isabella. Victor sat across from her, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, despite the dim lighting of the cafe. He looked every bit the part of a wealthy businessman, but there was something cold about his demeanor. "Elise Carter, the detective. What can I help you with?" Victor asked, his voice smooth, but with an underlying edge. Elise didn't waste time. "I'm here about Isabella Randall. What's your connection to her?" Victor seemed unfazed, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Isabella? We've worked together on a few business ventures, nothing too serious. She was trying to negotiate a deal with me on behalf of her family. But you'd have to ask her father for more details." Elise's eyes narrowed. She had already checked, and she knew Victor's involvement in the Randall business wasn't just casual. "You're lying, Victor. I know about your meetings. I know Isabella was afraid of something. Did you threaten her?" His eyes flickered for a brief moment. Then, with a smirk, he leaned back in his chair. "Detective, you don't understand the full picture. Everyone has their reasons. Isabella was getting in over her head. She thought she could handle it, but people like her don't understand the weight of these games." Elise's blood ran cold. What was he hinting at? Was Isabella involved in something much bigger than her family knew? "Tell me what she found out," Elise demanded. Victor's gaze turned cold, his lips curling into a smile. "If you really want to know, Detective, I'm afraid you'll have to dig deeper. But I warn you, some truths are better left buried." Elise knew there was more to the story, but she couldn't get any further out of Victor. She left the cafe feeling more unsettled than before. She knew she had to go back to the family, specifically Isabella's father, Gerald. But she also knew that there was more beneath the surface. Victor's words haunted her. Some truths are better left buried. Her instincts told her that Victor was part of something much bigger. And if she didn't act fast, Isabella would remain lost forever. Elise's next stop was the Randall estate. She returned to the mansion, hoping to confront Gerald with what she had learned. But when she arrived, something felt off. The gates were closed, and the usually welcoming porch light was turned off. The house looked as empty as it had when she first arrived, but this time, there was no sign of Gerald. She rang the doorbell, but no one answered. She knocked. Still nothing. Panic started to settle in. Elise knew Gerald had been acting strange, but this was different. She moved toward the back of the mansion where the garden was. She needed to find out what had happened. And then, as she turned the corner, she saw it. The back door to the mansion was wide open. The sight of the back door swung wide open sent a jolt of adrenaline through Elise's body. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious, to wait for backup. But the pressing sense of urgency pushed her forward. Isabella was still missing, and now, with the sudden disappearance of Gerald, Elise had no idea what she was walking into. Stepping carefully toward the door, Elise's gun was already in her hand, her grip steady. Her feet made no noise on the polished marble floors as she entered, her heart racing with every step she took into the mansion. The house was eerily silent. The soft, ambient noise of the city outside barely reached her ears. There was no movement, no sound of life. Elise's eyes quickly scanned the entrance hall, noting the lavish decor, the towering staircases, and the empty spaces that seemed to stretch endlessly. But this was not what mattered now. She moved down the hallway, her senses heightened. Every small creak of the floorboards, every shift in the air, made her even more alert. It wasn't until she reached the study, the same room where she had spoken to Gerald, that she noticed something different. The door was cracked open. Elise reached for the handle, her breath held in anticipation. The moment she pushed the door open, she saw it. Gerald was sitting at the desk, but he wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, a shadow that didn't belong. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his face partially obscured by the shadows. For a split second, Elise froze. The man at the desk wasn't Gerald, though. It was Victor Grayson, the same man who had been so tight-lipped during their meeting just hours before. His posture was rigid, his hands folded calmly in front of him, as if he were waiting for something. Gerald sat across from him, his hands clasped, his face expressionless. The exchange between the two was unsettling. "Gerald," Victor said, his voice smooth like a snake coiling. "You should have told her the truth." Gerald's eyes were hollow, devoid of any real emotion. He had been under pressure, too much pressure. But Elise couldn't understand why he was here, sitting calmly with the man who might be behind his daughter's disappearance. "What is this?" Elise demanded, stepping into the room, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's going on here?" Victor turned, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "Detective Carter, we've been expecting you." Elise raised her gun, pointing it steadily at Victor's chest. Where's Isabella? What have you done with her? Gerald finally spoke, his voice weak and trembling. I I never meant for it to happen. She was too involved. I didn't know what else to do, Elise. He looked at the floor, his voice breaking. Victor told me it was the only way. Only way to save the family. The syndicate's eyes were on us. I had to protect them. Victor chuckled darkly. You see, Detective, Gerald's actions have already sealed their fate. Your precious Isabella wasn't just a missing girl. She was the key to exposing everything. Her family's wealth wasn't just built on good business practices. They were involved in more than just corporate dealings. The Randall family, they've been laundering money for years, funneled through a network of associates I've built. Elise's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected something, but this was bigger than she had imagined. This wasn't just about a missing heir. It was about a tangled web of crime, corruption, and deceit stretching far beyond the family itself. Gerald's voice was barely audible. I tried to protect her, tried to stop her from getting involved, but she found the documents. She uncovered everything, and she wouldn't stop. She was determined to expose us. Victor stepped closer to Gerald, his voice low, almost soothing. And that, my dear Gerald, is where things went wrong. Isabella had no idea how deep this really went. She couldn't possibly understand the price of betrayal. Victor's words hit Elise like a slap. There was so much more going on, and she wasn't even sure she could piece it all together. The syndicate, the laundering, and now, Isabella. You were willing to put your own daughter at risk to save your legacy? Elise's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. That's why you lied to me. That's why you didn't tell me everything. Gerald's face turned pale, his eyes now filled with guilt and regret. She was never meant to get involved. She wasn't supposed to find out. But she kept pushing. She was determined to uncover the truth. I thought if I kept her in the dark, kept her away from the truth, she'd be safe. But I failed her. Victor's cold laugh interrupted the silence. It doesn't matter anymore, Detective. The Randall name, the legacy, it's all on the line. And as much as I hate to admit it, Isabella wasn't the first casualty. She won't be the last. I had to make sure she couldn't blow the lid off this. She wasn't just a daughter. She was a liability. A flash of realization hit Elise like a train. You're planning to get rid of her, aren't you? Victor's eyes darkened. It's already done. The words sent a chill through Elise's spine. She felt the room spin for a moment, the gravity of Victor's words crushing down on her. He wasn't just involved in Isabella's disappearance, he had orchestrated it. Where is she? Elise demanded, stepping forward. Victor looked at her coldly. She's where she belongs, Detective. Where no one can touch her now. Elise's eyes widened. Her mind raced. If Victor was telling the truth, Isabella could be in more danger than she had anticipated. You're lying, she said, her voice steady despite the growing sense of panic. You wouldn't have left her alive. Victor raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a twisted smile. You'll never find her in time. Before Elise could respond, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from behind her. She whipped around, only to find Gerald slowly standing up, his movements sluggish, as if he were struggling to hold himself together. He was holding something in his hand, a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to her silently, his eyes avoiding hers. "What is this?" Elise asked, unfolding the paper. It was a map, and the marked location, the docks, the very place she had suspected all along. "It's where it all ends," Gerald whispered, his voice breaking. Victor's eyes glimmered with something sinister as he saw the recognition in Elise's face. "You'll find her there, detective. But don't bother trying to save her. She's already gone." Elise felt the weight of the map in her hand, her fingers trembling as she studied the coordinates. The docks. It was a place she knew well, a place that held too many dark memories. The shadows of the past seemed to creep around her, and she couldn't help but feel the sense of urgency creeping through her veins. She turned back toward Gerald and Victor. Gerald was standing in the corner, his face pale, his hands shaking as he clutched his knees, his head bowed in shame. Victor, on the other hand, wore a grin that sent a chill down Elise's spine. He looked too calm, too satisfied. "I'll be taking this map," Elise said, her voice firm as she folded it carefully and shoved it into her jacket pocket. "Now, where exactly is this dock? Give me a location and I'll make sure we get there faster than you can blink." Victor, however, didn't offer any further details. Instead, he simply chuckled softly. "Detective, the game is over. The syndicate will always have a hand in the city. You think the one woman's disappearance is going to bring it all down? You don't understand how deep it goes. People like me, people who run things, always have the upper hand." Elise's patience was starting to run thin. She knew she couldn't let Victor's taunts distract her. Isabella's life was at stake, and she couldn't afford to waste any more time. With a hard, cold look, she turned back to Gerald. "Gerald, you need to tell me everything. Don't make this harder than it already is. If you know more about what's going on, now is the time to tell me." Gerald's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd entered the house, she saw something resembling guilt flicker in his expression. "It was always about money," he said quietly, voice breaking. "The Randall legacy, the fortune. My father built it all on secrets, on lies. I never questioned it, never thought about the cost. But Isabella, she dug too deep. She knew too much. I couldn't protect her, detective. I couldn't." The words were like daggers, each one plunging deeper into the story. Elise knew that this was just the beginning. The surface had barely been scratched, and yet the cost of the secrets Gerald was speaking of was mounting. Isabella's life wasn't the only one hanging in the balance. There were countless others, and they were all tied together in this vast web of lies and corruption. "Who else is involved in this?" Elise pressed. "Who else has been helping Victor?" Gerald's face contorted in agony as he finally broke down. "You won't believe me. I never wanted to be a part of it, but I couldn't get out. It's the board members, the city council, people you'd never suspect. Victor's only one piece of the puzzle, but the real power lies with the syndicate." Elise's mind spun as she tried to process the implications. The syndicate. The name had come up before, but it had always been a whisper, a rumor, nothing more than a vague threat in the shadows. But now, it was clear that the syndicate's grip on the city was deeper than anyone had imagined. "You're telling me the board members and councilmen are involved in this?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Gerald nodded, tears streaming down his face. Yes, they're the ones pulling the strings. Victor, me, and everyone else. We were just pawns in their game. But Isabella, she was too smart. She started making connections, digging into her father's old files, and that's when she found the truth. And now, they'll do anything to make sure it stays buried. Elise's heart raced. She had to act fast. Every moment spent talking, every second that ticked by, was another second Isabella could be in danger. And this new information about the syndicate, their connections to the city's highest powers, was too explosive to ignore. The docks were no more than 15 minutes away, but the tension in the air felt like an eternity. As Elise raced through the city streets with Rachel beside her, her thoughts kept returning to the map, to the warning Victor had given. She knew the docks like the back of her hand, but tonight, the place felt different, darker, more menacing. Rachel, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, glanced over at Elise. "You think we'll make it in time?" Elise didn't answer immediately. Her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. If Victor's words were to be believed, Isabella wasn't just being held hostage. She was at the center of a much larger conspiracy. This wasn't just about protecting the Randall family's fortune. This was about something far more dangerous. A system of corruption that reached into every corner of the city. "I don't know," Elise said finally, her voice tight. "But I'll be damned if we don't try." The streetlights blurred by as they sped through the city, their headlights casting fleeting shadows along the darkened buildings. In her gut, Elise could feel the stakes rising higher with each passing second. Whatever they found at the docks, whatever secrets lay in wait, it was the key to everything. When they finally arrived, the docks were quiet, too quiet. The usual sound of the waves crashing against the pier was absent. Instead, there was only the low hum of the wind and the distant sound of a few seagulls overhead. Elise's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She signaled for Rachel to park the car a few blocks away, and they both got out, moving cautiously toward the warehouses. The moonlight barely illuminated the area, leaving large sections of the dock in complete darkness. The towering shadows of the industrial buildings seemed to loom over them, as if watching their every move. Elise checked her gun one last time and gestured for Rachel to follow. They moved silently, creeping through the shadows. There was no sign of life, no sounds of people moving around. But the further they went, the more Elise could feel the tension building. They approached a large warehouse at the far end of the pier, the doors slightly ajar. Elise motioned for Rachel to stay behind, her steps slow and deliberate as she approached the entrance. Before she could push the door open, a voice called out from the shadows. "You're too late, Detective." Elise whipped around, her gun raised instantly. Standing before her, silhouetted against the dim light, was none other than Victor Grayson. "Victor," Elise said, her voice low and steady, "you've got nowhere to run. This ends tonight." Victor smiled, but it wasn't a smile of confidence, it was one of mockery. "You think this is over? You have no idea how deep this goes. You've uncovered a tiny fraction of the truth. The rest will stay buried forever." He stepped forward, and as he did, a dozen figures emerged from the darkness behind him. Men in dark clothing, armed and ready. Elise's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't just a showdown with Victor. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that could change everything for the city. The syndicate was about to make its final play. The figures emerging from the shadows were like ghosts in the night, their cold eyes fixed on Elise and Rachel. Victor, standing at the center, seemed to be the orchestrator of it all, and his smile was still plastered on his face, as if he knew something they didn't. Elise's mind raced, calculating the odds. There were at least 12 men, all armed, and 2 of them were blocking her path to the door she'd just been about to enter. Victor slowly raised his hands in mock surrender, as if this was all just a game to him. "You really think you're going to stop all of this? You're too far in now, Detective. The city is already under our control. You and your little investigation were never more than a distraction." Elise's grip tightened on her weapon. "I don't care what you think, Victor. It's over for you. You won't get away with this." Rachel, standing a few steps behind Elise, whispered, "What do we do now?" "Stay close, and whatever happens, don't let them surround us," Elise responded, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. She had faced much worse in her career, but something about this moment felt different. This wasn't just about one criminal or one crime. This was an empire of corruption, and it was crumbling right in front of her. Victor's laugh echoed in the silence. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you, Detective? The truth is, your efforts were never going to be enough. The people behind this, they own everything. The city, the police, even the press. There's no one left to expose us." Elise's pulse quickened as she took another step forward. Her eyes scanned the warehouse for any potential escape routes or hiding spots. "We'll see about that," she muttered, tightening her grip on her gun. At that moment, the door to the warehouse creaked open wider, and a man stepped into the frame. Elise's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him, Captain Hernandez. The man who had been her superior, the man she had trusted, was standing there with a smug smile. He had been working with Victor all along. "You," Elise said, her voice like ice. "I should have known." Hernandez looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between disappointment and amusement. "Detective Carter, you've always been so idealistic. You thought you could change the system. You thought you could expose the truth. We own the system, and you were just too naive to see it." The betrayal hit harder than Elise expected. Hernandez had been her mentor, the one person she had trusted in the precinct. But now, it was clear that everything he had ever said, every piece of advice, had been a lie. "You're with them," Rachel said, her voice full of disbelief. "All along. You were behind this?" Hernandez sighed, a deep, almost sorrowful sound, as he stepped closer. "I didn't want this, Rachel. But you don't understand. There's no choice. We all make sacrifices for the greater good. What we're doing is ensuring the survival of this city's future. The syndicate? They're the ones who control everything. What happens, when it happens, who gets what. And you think you can just come in here and tear it all down? It's impossible." Elise's mind raced, but she kept her composure. She had one chance, and she couldn't let it slip away. Hernandez, Victor, and the syndicate. They were all connected. But she couldn't let their web of lies and power stop her from saving Isabella. With a sharp nod, she signaled to Rachel, "We need to make a move now." The two of them moved in sync, ducking behind a stack of crates, just as one of the syndicate's men raised his gun. Shots rang out in the warehouse, the deafening sound echoing through the walls. The men, began to scatter, trying to catch them off guard. But Elise and Rachel were ready. "Move!" Elise shouted as she darted to the side, using the crates as cover. The air was thick with tension, gunshots, shouts, and the sound of footsteps filled the warehouse as the confrontation escalated. Elise didn't have time to think. She just reacted. She had to make sure she got to Isabella before anyone else did. As the chaos unfolded, Elise saw Victor moving toward the back of the warehouse. He wasn't heading toward the docks. He was heading to a smaller, more secluded office. There was no time to second guess. Victor was the key, and she needed to stop him. Rachel, still behind cover, shouted, "Elise, be careful!" But Elise didn't stop. She sprinted toward the office, her gun raised and her focus locked on Victor. She reached the door just as Victor was about to slip inside. Without hesitation, Elise slammed her shoulder against it, breaking the door open with a loud crash. Inside, Victor was waiting, his back to the door. He turned quickly, but Elise was faster. She pointed the gun directly at him, her voice cold and determined. "It's over, Victor. You're not getting away." Victor's face twisted into a grimace of frustration. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he spat, stepping toward the window, his hand reaching for something hidden in his jacket. Elise's heart raced as she recognized the motion. He was reaching for something, perhaps a gun or worse. Without thinking, she fired a warning shot, hitting the wall next to him. Victor froze. "You think you've won? You think you've stopped us? You're too late. You'll never stop what's coming. You're nothing but a pawn." Before Elise could respond, there was a sudden noise from behind her. She whipped around, and in that instant, she saw Gerald Randall emerging from the shadows, a gun in his trembling hands. "Don't do this, Gerald," Elise called out, her voice steady. "We can still end this. We can still save your daughter." But Gerald's face was hardened, his eyes glazed with fear and anger. "It's too late. I can't turn back now. The syndicate has too much power. You don't know how far this goes. You don't know what they'll do if I betray them." Elise's heart sank. She had hoped that Gerald would come to his senses, but the desperation in his eyes told her it was too late. He was too deep in it now, too far gone to turn back. The sound of distant footsteps reached their ears. Someone else was coming. Elise couldn't afford to hesitate. Her thoughts were clearer than ever before. She had to act. She aimed her gun at Gerald, but instead of firing, she shouted, "Drop the gun, Gerald. It's not too late. You can stop all of this." He didn't respond. His eyes flickered to Victor and then back to Elise. His grip tightened on the weapon, and his fingers started to squeeze the trigger. In that moment, the door to the office swung open. More men, members of the syndicate, entered the room, their guns drawn. Elise was trapped, but she was not done. The weight of the situation pressed down on Elise like a vice. The door was now blocked by syndicate goons, their weapons drawn, eyes locked on her every movement. Her breath was steady, but her mind was racing. Gerald, still holding the gun, was edging closer to making a decision. Victor stood at the window, his expression one of cold amusement as he watched the scene unfold. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to click into place, but Elise knew there wasn't much time left. Her hand twitched toward the gun, holstered at her side. She wasn't just going to wait for them to make their move. No, she had to take control. She wasn't going down without a fight. "Gerald, put the gun down," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Think about your daughter. Think about what you're about to do. This isn't the answer." Gerald's hand trembled, the gun wavering slightly in his grip. His face was pale, covered in a sheen of sweat. The guilt was consuming him, and Elise could see that. He was caught between loyalty to the syndicate, his fear of what they would do if he betrayed them, and his love for his daughter. I can't," Gerald muttered under his breath, eyes darting from Elise to Victor, as though searching for some kind of reassurance. "They'll kill me. They'll kill Isabella if I don't. If you don't, you'll have a chance to save her." Elise cut him off, her eyes locked on his. "You can't let them control you. I'm here to help, but you need to trust me." Victor's smug smile never wavered. "This is your last warning, Detective. Let him go. Let it all go. You're playing a game you'll never win." Elise could see the truth in his words. The syndicate had its claws in every corner of the city, and for years, people like Gerald had been too afraid to escape its grip. She had one chance to make this right, and she couldn't afford to fail. A tense silence fell over the room. It felt like everything had come to a standstill, as though the air had thickened to the point where even the smallest movement could break the fragile balance. Then, in a split second, everything changed. Gerald's gun suddenly dropped from his hands, clattering to the ground. He looked as if he had been jolted out of his trance, his body shuddering as he stepped back from it, his face contorted in a mix of relief and horror. I'm sorry, Isabella," Gerald whispered, his voice barely audible as he sank to his knees. Elise wasted no time. She lunged forward, grabbing Gerald's arm and pulling him toward the door. "We need to get out of here now," she said, her voice urgent. But as soon as she reached for the handle, the sound of footsteps from the hallway echoed again. This time, it was too late. The syndicate was closing in. Victor's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "You think you can just walk out of here? You've crossed a line, Detective. The game ends tonight." A flurry of gunfire erupted, and Elise's reflexes kicked in. She pulled Gerald behind a nearby crate, the bullets ricocheting off the walls. Rachel's voice rang out from the hallway, the sounds of her own gunfire muffled by the chaos. Elise's pulse raced as she reached for her own gun, moving from behind the crate and ducking low. The chaos was consuming everything. The warehouse was a battleground. There was no clear line between ally and enemy now. It was every person for themselves. "Rachel!" Elise shouted as she fired back toward the syndicate's men. "We need to get out. We need to find Isabella." Rachel appeared around the corner, moving swiftly with her own gun aimed at the men. "We're not leaving without her," Rachel replied, her voice steely. "Let's go." The two of them ran for the back of the warehouse, aiming for an emergency exit they'd noticed earlier. But just as they reached the door, a loud, grating voice filled the air. "Don't even think about it," Victor called from across the room. "It's too late. You're trapped." Elise's eyes darted around, scanning for a way out. The syndicate had completely cornered them. But then she noticed something. A small, rusted grate high on the wall, partially obscured by a stack of crates. It was tight, but it was an escape. "Up there!" she shouted to Rachel. "Go. Without hesitation, Rachel darted towards the grate. Elise followed closely behind, and in a matter of seconds, they were pulling themselves up through the narrow opening. The air inside the shaft was stale, but it was their only way out. They scrambled up through the tunnel, climbing as fast as they could, the sounds of gunfire and shouting echoing behind them. But it wasn't just the noise they had to worry about. It was the time ticking away. How much longer would they be safe? How much longer before the syndicate realized where they were headed? They reached the rooftop, and Elise quickly surveyed their surroundings. They were high above the city, looking down at the labyrinth of alleys and streets that sprawled below them. The docks were in sight, just a few miles off to the west. That's where they needed to go. That's where Isabella had to be. "We need to move fast," Elise said, her voice filled with urgency. "The docks are close. They'll be expecting us to take the easy route out of the city. We'll take the rooftops." Rachel nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Let's go." As they moved across the rooftops, the adrenaline coursing through their veins, Elise's mind couldn't help but race ahead. What would they find at the docks? Was Isabella still alive? And what would they be walking into? The thought of the syndicate was like a dark cloud hanging over her. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out, and with it came the inevitable confrontation. If she didn't act now, if they didn't expose the syndicate's influence, Isabella's disappearance would be just the first in a long line of casualties. But as they neared the edge of the last building, Elise stopped suddenly. She turned toward Rachel, her face grave. "We're getting close. Stay alert." Rachel's eyes narrowed as she readied her gun. Always. As the final steps of their escape took them closer to the docks, Elise could feel the weight of every choice she had made. The adrenaline had started to fade, but the urgency hadn't. Isabella's life still hung in the balance, and every moment was critical. The city's skyline was now a distant silhouette, shrouded in the fog of night, as the two of them approached the edge of the docks. The air smelled of salt and rust, the sounds of the waves crashing against the wooden piers, reverberating through the cool night. But in the back of Elise's mind, she knew that it wasn't the peaceful rhythm of the water they had to worry about. It was the stillness that preceded a storm, the calm before everything went wrong. They dropped down from the rooftop to the alley below, their feet landing softly on the ground. Elise's heart raced, and she motioned for Rachel to follow her into the darkness. They were close now. The warehouses loomed ahead, shadowed and silent, with only the occasional flicker of a faulty streetlight illuminating the narrow streets. "You ready for this?" Rachel whispered, as they moved further into the maze of dockside buildings. "Ready as I'll ever be," Elise replied, her eyes scanning every corner, every potential hiding spot. She could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right. The soft glow of a street lamp flickered near an old warehouse at the end of the dock, and Elise's instincts flared. It was too quiet. It was almost as if the whole area had been evacuated, or worse, as if it were a trap. "Stay low," Elise murmured, pulling her hood tighter over her head as they crept toward the building. They passed through the shadows, her footsteps muffled by the damp ground beneath them. Then, out of nowhere, the silence was shattered by the loud screech of metal on metal. The doors of the warehouse swung open, and before either of them could react, a group of men emerged from the darkness, their faces masked. They were waiting for them. Elise's blood ran cold. She knew that whoever they weren't here for a peaceful negotiation. "You're too late," one of the men sneered, his voice low but filled with malice. "She's already gone." Without warning, they raised their guns, aiming directly at Elise and Rachel. The tension in the air was unbearable. Elise had no choice but to act. In a split second, Elise dove to the side, pulling Rachel along with her as bullets whizzed past. The sound of gunfire echoed in the night, and Elise's mind raced. They had to keep moving. They couldn't let them get to Isabella first. "Get to cover!" Elise shouted, pushing Rachel toward the side of a nearby container. They scrambled behind it, using it as a shield. Elise peeked around the corner, assessing the situation. The men were beginning to circle, trying to trap them between the docks and the warehouse. Time was running out. "Elise," Rachel called, her voice tight with urgency. "What's the plan?" Elise took a deep breath, her mind racing. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't let the syndicate think they had control over this situation. She could see the dim light from the warehouse's interior flickering. And in that brief moment of clarity, she made a decision. "We need to get inside," she said. "They'll be expecting us to run, but we'll use that against them. I'll cover you while you move. We can't let them lock us out." Rachel nodded, and without another word, Elise turned her back to her and fired a few shots in the direction of the men, drawing their attention. The echo of gunfire was almost deafening as it reverberated through the empty dock, but it worked. The men moved forward toward Elise's position just as Rachel made her way to the warehouse door. The seconds felt like hours, but Elise stayed focused, keeping her aim steady as she continued to shoot, just enough to keep them from charging forward. Finally, she heard the sound of the lock on the warehouse door clicking open, and Rachel was inside. "Elise!" Rachel's voice echoed from inside. "Come on now!" With a final glance, Elise darted toward the door, diving inside just as the men turned back toward the entrance. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking it quickly. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with tension. The place was eerily quiet, save for the sound of their own breathing. Elise took a deep breath and let her senses sharpen. The faint glow from a few overhead lights revealed crates stacked high, machinery in the corner, and a faint outline of a figure tied to one of the posts in the center of the room. Isabella. Elise's heart skipped a beat as she rushed forward, but as she did, a figure appeared from the shadows. It was Victor. "Not so fast, detective," he said, his voice calm, almost pleased with himself. He stepped forward, blocking their path, his gun trained on them. "Get out of the way, Victor," Elise demanded, her voice cold. "This is over." Victor's lips curled into a grin. "You think it's over?" "No, detective. This is just the beginning. You've been playing into my hands this whole time. You think you can just walk in here and fix everything?" Elise didn't flinch. She kept her gun raised, her eyes never leaving Victor's. "What did you do to her, Victor? Tell me now, or I swear to God I'll make you regret this." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Isabella is just the beginning, detective. This city is a pawn in a much larger game. You've exposed a fraction of the truth, but you'll never expose all of it. You'll never see the full picture. But you've played your part, and now we get to finish this." Just as Victor spoke, there was a sudden crash from the far side of the warehouse, followed by more footsteps. Elise's heart raced again. More men? No, it was someone else. A figure emerged from the shadows, a dark silhouette. And then, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot rang out, and Victor's smug expression faltered. Victor stumbled back, his hand clutching his chest as he fell to the floor. And there, standing in the doorway, was none other than Gerald Randall. Elise's jaw dropped. Gerald? What are you doing here? Gerald's face was grim, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and determination. I couldn't let you do this alone, he said, his voice shaking. I couldn't let her die for this. He took another step into the room, gun still in hand. I've made so many mistakes, but I can't let Victor win. You were right, Elise. You were right all along. Victor, gasping for air, tried to lift his head. You fool, you'll never win. There's too much power. Gerald looked at Victor with cold eyes. Not anymore. As Victor's last breath left him, the weight of the room seemed to lift. The power had shifted. It was over. Story 2. The murder with a silent witness. The city was suffocating in a blanket of fog. The neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting eerie, distorted shadows along the empty streets. The sound of distant traffic blended with the occasional muffled sound of sirens. But everything seemed to be moving slower than it should, like the city itself was holding its breath. For Detective Olivia Harris, it felt like a pause, a moment before the storm. Olivia had worked in homicide for years, but there was always one case that haunted her more than the others. It wasn't the high-profile cases with the criminals who'd been caught red-handed. It wasn't the easy-to-solve cases. It was the ones with no clear answers, the ones that left more questions than closure. And this latest one had her gripped in a way she couldn't explain. It all started with a phone call from the hospital. A young woman was found dead in her apartment. No signs of forced entry, no obvious cause of death. But there was something odd about the way she had been positioned. She was found sitting in front of a mirror, her eyes wide open, staring into her own reflection. There were no immediate signs of violence, no stab wounds, no gunshot wounds. It was as if she had simply died there, without any explanation. But there was one more thing. The woman's name, Emily Taylor. Her name wasn't familiar, but there was something about the case that felt too personal, too familiar. Olivia's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this death than just an unsolved murder. The apartment was eerily quiet as Olivia stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The door had been left ajar, and as she crossed the threshold, she could immediately feel the oppressive stillness of the place. It was as though the walls were holding secrets, suffocating beneath the weight of something terrible that had happened. Emily's apartment was small, cozy even. There were personal touches everywhere. Photos on the walls, a cup of coffee half drunk on the table, a book left open on the couch. Everything looked like it had been paused. But then there was the mirror, the most striking feature in the room. A large mirror stood against the far wall, reflecting the dim light from the window and casting the room in a ghostly glow. Olivia walked over to the mirror, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the reflection, was Emily, sitting with her back straight, her head tilted slightly, as if she had been looking at her own reflection for too long. Her face was pale, lifeless, and her eyes were wide open, staring directly into the mirror. It was unnerving. There was something about her position that made it feel like this wasn't just a random death. This was intentional. The way she had been placed, it was almost ritualistic. A voice broke the silence. "Detective Harris?" Olivia turned quickly, her hand instinctively resting on her gun. She relaxed when she saw Officer Daniels, one of the first responders on the scene. He looked just as unsettled as she felt. "The medical examiner's still outside, but they didn't find anything unusual," Daniels said, his voice strained. "We've checked the apartment, and there's nothing to suggest a break-in. No signs of a struggle. No robbery." Olivia nodded, her gaze still locked on Emily's reflection. "Then why is she sitting like that? Why is she staring at herself? And why—" She paused, her thoughts suddenly taking shape. Why was she alone? "Her boyfriend found her like this," Daniels continued. "They were planning to meet up later in the evening, but he was running late. When he finally got here, he found her dead and called it in." Olivia's heart sank. A boyfriend. It was always the first person they looked at in a case like this, but there was something that didn't add up. Why would a boyfriend, someone she had loved enough to meet, leave her alone in such a strange position? "Did he say anything strange?" Olivia asked, her eyes never leaving the mirror. Did he notice anything unusual? Any signs that she knew something was wrong? "He was pretty shaken up, to be honest," Daniel said, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his jacket. "He said she'd been acting a little distant lately, but nothing more than that. He was apparently on the phone with her earlier in the day, and everything seemed normal." Olivia's mind kept circling back to the same thing, the mirror. It was too odd, too deliberate. But what did it mean? Later that evening, Olivia found herself sitting across from Jason Miller, Emily's boyfriend. He was in his early 30s, dressed in a wrinkled shirt, his eyes bloodshot from hours of crying. He sat stiffly in the interrogation room, his hands clasped tightly together. "Jason, I need you to walk me through everything again," Olivia said, her voice calm but insistent. "What happened when you got to Emily's apartment?" Jason wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and exhaled sharply. "I told you everything already. I came to her apartment after work. We were supposed to have dinner, but she didn't answer the door when I knocked. I thought she was just busy, so I used the spare key. I found her sitting there, staring into the mirror. She looked like she was frozen, like she couldn't move or blink. I don't know what happened." Olivia watched him carefully, trying to read the lines of his face. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite adding up. He sounded sincere, but there was a flicker in his eyes that told her he was hiding something. Did Emily have any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her? Jason hesitated. No one. She had a few disagreements with friends here and there, but she was always a good person. No enemies, no threats. Olivia leaned forward. "What about you? Were there any issues between the two of you? Any fights? Any reason you'd be in this apartment dealing with a murder?" Jason's eyes widened, his mouth going dry. "What? No, we weren't perfect, but I loved her. We were planning on getting engaged soon. I swear to you, Detective, I didn't hurt her." Olivia stayed silent for a moment, studying his face. She didn't believe him. Not completely. She needed more answers, and that meant taking a closer look at Emily's life. "Do you have any idea why she was staring into the mirror?" Olivia asked, keeping her tone neutral. Jason looked at her, his face wrinkled in confusion. The mirror? He shook his head. No. She wasn't like that. She always loved the mirror. She said it helped her see herself clearly. But she never sat there like that. She was different recently. Quiet, distant, like she was lost in her thoughts. Olivia knew there was more. Did she talk about anything unusual? Any fears, any strange feelings she had? Jason swallowed hard. She had been seeing a therapist. She didn't tell me much about it, but she said it helped her deal with some stuff from her past. She didn't go into detail, but she was changing, Detective. And now she's dead. Olivia's mind was spinning. The therapist could be the key. If there was something in Emily's past that had caught up with her, it could explain everything. The way she had been positioned, the strange stillness. Perhaps she had been trying to confront something buried deep inside her. I need to speak with her therapist, Olivia said, standing up. We'll get to the bottom of this. Jason nodded, his face filled with remorse. Please find out what happened. I loved her. As Olivia walked out of the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jason was hiding something. But she also had a gut feeling that the truth, whatever it was locked in Emily's past, hidden somewhere she had been trying to avoid. And now, that past had come back to claim her life. The air in the therapist's office was thick with tension as Dr. Linda Simmons sat across from Olivia, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Dr. Simmons was a woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that made it difficult to read her intentions. She was an experienced therapist, someone who had seen all sorts of trauma and personal struggles, but something about her response to Emily's case made Olivia uneasy. Detective Harris, I assure you, I've been helping Emily with some personal struggles, but I don't know anything about her death, Dr. Simmons said, her voice soft but firm. Olivia had done her homework before arriving. Dr. Simmons had a well-established practice in the city, and her professional credentials were impeccable. She was well-liked by her clients, and her reputation was spotless. Still, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was holding back something crucial. You've been treating Emily for a while now, Olivia said, leaning forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Dr. Simmons. What can you tell me about the sessions you had with her? Was she dealing with anything particularly difficult? Dr. Simmons paused for a long moment, as if carefully considering her words. Emily was a very private person. She was dealing with some deep-seated anxiety and depression, but she never expressed fear for her life, if that's what you're implying. She was looking for closure, not just from her past, but from herself. Olivia raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by closure? Was she afraid of anything? She was afraid of not being enough, Dr. Simmons explained, her voice becoming more reflective. She often talked about feeling like she was constantly failing, whether it was in her relationships or her career. She had a tough time with self-acceptance. But beyond that, she also felt trapped, like she was tied to something in her past, something unresolved. I couldn't get her to open up fully about what that was, but it haunted her. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the therapist's words. There was something there, something Emily had been holding on to, something she had tried to confront in her last days. The idea of being trapped by something unresolved seemed to match the eerie positioning of Emily's body, sitting frozen in front of the mirror. Did Emily ever mention anyone specific from her past? Olivia asked, her mind ticking through the possibilities. A person, a place, something that could have triggered this anxiety? Dr. Simmons shifted in her seat, her eyes glancing away for a moment before meeting Olivia's gaze. She did, but it wasn't a person. It was a place. Olivia's curiosity piqued. What place? A cabin, Dr. Simmons said slowly. A place she visited when she was younger. A remote location far outside the city. She described it as a place of refuge, but also a place of torment. It was where something happened, something she didn't want to confront, but couldn't stop thinking about. She never told me what exactly, but I believe it was tied to the loss of someone important to her. A cabin? Olivia repeated. Where is this cabin? I don't know for certain, Dr. Simmons said, her voice tight with hesitation. But she mentioned it a few times. She said she wanted to return to it, to confront whatever happened there. But she never went. I think she thought it would be too much. Olivia absorbed the information, her mind racing. If Emily had returned to that cabin to confront whatever had haunted her, it could explain the disturbing circumstances of her death. The mirror, staring into her reflection, could have been her way of facing herself before the final confrontation. Do you have any idea how I can find this place? Olivia asked, her tone intense. Dr. Simmons hesitated, but then nodded, taking a deep breath. She mentioned that it was up north near the woods. I'm not entirely sure where, but I do remember her saying it was close to a small town called Ashford, about an hour and a half away. The cabin belonged to her family, but they had sold it years ago. Ashford. It was a small, sleepy town, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Olivia's gut told her that this was the key. She had to get there. Whatever Emily had left behind, whatever she had buried in that cabin, was the answer to the case. It was the one missing piece she hadn't uncovered yet. I'll need a full report of her therapy sessions, everything you have, Olivia said firmly. I'll be heading to Ashford. Dr. Simmons nodded. I'll have the records ready for you, Detective, but please be careful. If Emily was trying to confront something there, it may not be a good idea to dig it up. Some things are better left buried. Olivia stood up, her resolve clear. I have to go there. If I'm going to understand what happened to Emily, I have to face whatever's waiting in Ashford. By the time Olivia made it to Ashford, the sun had already begun to set, casting an orange glow across the horizon. The small town was quiet, as if it had been forgotten by time. The houses were old, some of them in desperate need of repair, but the air was thick with history. Olivia could almost feel the weight of it as she drove through the winding streets, her headlights cutting through the fading light. The town wasn't much more than a few scattered buildings and a couple of small shops, but Ashford's charm lay in its simplicity. There was no rush here, no hurry. People took their time, as though they had all the time in the world. But Olivia knew better than anyone that small towns like this often hid the most twisted secrets. She pulled into a gas station and stepped out, looking for any sign that could point her toward the cabin. An older man was sitting on a bench outside the store, smoking a cigarette. Olivia approached him, her eyes narrowing as she took in the weathered look of the man. He had the look of someone who had lived a lifetime in this small town. "Excuse me, sir," Olivia called. "I'm looking for a cabin that used to belong to the Taylor family. Do you know where it is?" The man glanced at her through his squinted eyes, then took a slow drag from his cigarette. "The Taylors, huh?" he muttered. "That place has been abandoned for years. Nobody's been up there in a long time." "Do you know where it is?" Olivia asked again, her voice steady. He exhaled a puff of smoke and nodded towards the hills. "Up in the woods, not far from here. You can't miss it. But you won't find anyone who will talk about it. The Taylors were a strange bunch, always kept to themselves." Olivia's pulse quickened. She had a feeling that this was it, the last piece of the puzzle. "Thank you," she said, turning toward her car. The drive to the cabin was short but winding. As she reached the edge of the woods, the road became rougher, less traveled. The trees loomed overhead, their shadows stretching across the narrow path. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached a small clearing. The cabin stood in front of her, an imposing figure in the midst of the dense forest. It was old, run down, and clearly abandoned. But as Olivia stepped out of the car, she felt a chill run down her spine. This place had secrets that were about to be uncovered. The cabin loomed in front of Olivia, its dark, decaying structure a stark contrast to the beauty of the surrounding woods. The air was colder here, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels, watching her every move. She stepped forward, her boots crunching the dry leaves beneath her feet. The silence was deafening. There were no birds, no distant sounds of traffic, just the eerie stillness of the forest. It felt like the kind of place where time had stopped moving, where nothing could escape from the past. Olivia felt a twinge of unease, but she pushed it aside. She had a job to do. The truth about Emily's death was buried somewhere here, and she wasn't leaving without it. She reached the porch and stood still for a moment, studying the cabin's weathered exterior. The wood was old, faded from years of neglect, the paint peeling away in large patches. A single window on the second floor stared out at her like an eye. Empty. Lifeless. She reached for the door handle and turned it. It creaked open with ease, as though the cabin had been waiting for her. The inside of the cabin was dark, filled with the scent of mildew and old wood. Dust floated in the dim light that seeped through the cracks in the walls. The space was cramped, with little more than a few pieces of old furniture and the remnants of a once cozy home. But it was clear that this was not a place anyone had lived in for a long time. Olivia's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of the ordinary. She moved cautiously through the narrow hallway, each step heavy with anticipation. Her flashlight flickered in the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten, abandoned by time, but she knew better. Emily had been here, and whatever had happened here had led to her death. She reached the main room, and there, in the far corner, was a small table. On it, a collection of old photographs, tattered and worn, was scattered across the surface. Olivia walked over and examined them. They were pictures of Emily, her family, and a few unknown faces. She picked up one photo. Emily, as a young girl, smiling brightly with a man standing beside her. Her father, perhaps. But there was something in the background of the photo. A shadow. A figure standing just outside the frame. Olivia squinted, but the shadowy figure was too vague to make out. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. There was something unsettling about these photos. something that didn't sit right with her. It was as if Emily had been trying to make sense of something in her past, something she couldn't escape. Then, Olivia's attention was drawn to something else. A large wooden chest tucked away in the corner of the room. It was old, the wood scarred and weathered, but the lock on it seemed newer. Olivia approached the chest cautiously, her hand hovering over the lock. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if she were about to uncover something that would change everything. She took a deep breath, her fingers wrapping around the lock. With one swift motion, she opened it. Inside, the chest was filled with old journals, pages upon pages of handwritten notes, filled with Emily's scrawled handwriting. Olivia's heart quickened. She pulled one of the journals from the chest and began to flip through it. It was filled with the musings of a troubled mind, thoughts of guilt, fear, and regret. Emily had written about something she could never escape, something that haunted her even in the quiet of her own home. As Olivia turned the pages, she found entries that referenced a secret, a long-buried secret that Emily had been trying to confront for years. There was one entry that stood out, the words, jagged and desperate. "I know what happened here. I know what they did. I just need to tell someone, but I'm too afraid. I can't do this alone. The mirror, it's always been there, always watching. I can't escape it. The past won't let me go." Olivia's stomach churned as she read those words. Emily hadn't just been haunted by memories. She had been trapped by them. And the mirror? Was it symbolic of her guilt or something far darker? The more Olivia read, the clearer the picture became. Emily had been holding on to something for years, something so horrific that it had driven her to the point of obsession. She had written about feeling as though she were being followed, watched, as if the past were stalking her, refusing to let her move on. Suddenly, Olivia froze. She turned back to the last few pages of the journal, where Emily had written in a frenzied script, "I have to go back to the cabin. I have to see it again. The truth is in the woods, in the dark places. I have to face it. The mirror has shown me enough, but I can't run anymore. I have to face what happened." The journal ended abruptly there, the last page left unfinished. The weight of Emily's words hit Olivia like a physical blow. It was clear now. Emily had returned to this cabin to confront something from her past. And whatever it was, it had led her to her death. Olivia stood up, her mind reeling. The mirror, the cabin, the journals, it was all connected. But how? What had Emily seen in the woods that had destroyed her? And what was the truth she had been trying to uncover? As Olivia continued to search the cabin, her thoughts kept racing back to the journal. The truth was in the woods. She turned back to the window, looking out into the dense forest. The trees loomed in the distance, silent and imposing. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest held the answers. She had to go out there, to the very place where Emily had confronted her past. Olivia grabbed her flashlight and headed for the door. She couldn't stop now. There were answers waiting in the woods, and she would find them. She had to. The path through the forest was narrow, winding, and treacherous. Olivia's flashlight barely cut through the dense canopy overhead, casting long, menacing shadows on the ground. The silence of the woods was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. She felt like she was being swallowed by the forest, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She followed the faint trail, her heart beating faster with every step. The trees seemed to close in around her, the darkness swallowing her whole. As she ventured deeper into the woods, she saw something, a clearing up ahead, and standing at the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated mirror. It was an ancient-looking thing, covered in dirt and grime, reflecting the faint light from Olivia's flashlight. She approached it slowly, feeling the weight of her own breath in the stillness. And then, the realization hit her like a tidal wave. Emily hadn't been running from her past. She had been running from this. The mirror wasn't just a symbol, it was the key to everything. Olivia stared into the glass, her own reflection staring back at her. But in the reflection, something was different. She could see a shadow moving behind her, something that didn't belong. It was like the mirror was showing her something else. Something that wasn't just in front of her, but behind her. She turned around, her hand instinctively reaching for her gun. And that's when she saw it. Olivia's heart pounded as she turned quickly, her flashlight cutting through the heavy forest air. Her instincts told her she wasn't alone. She wasn't sure why or how, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, as though something was watching her, something just out of sight. She stepped cautiously, moving slowly toward the trees, her eyes scanning the dark outlines of the trunks, looking for any sign of movement. But the woods were silent, still, and unyielding. She could hear her own breath as it quickened. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was something far darker, something buried in the shadows of Emily's past, the mirror. She had to return to it. Turning back, she walked toward the clearing again. Her flashlight flickered again, casting strange shadows in the twilight. The mirror still stood there, unmoved, as if waiting for her. It was then that she noticed it. The reflection wasn't right. In the mirror, her own reflection was there. But behind her, something was wrong. A shadow moved in the glass, but not in the real world. It was as though the forest itself was shifting and breathing through the mirror. For a moment, Olivia wasn't sure if her mind was playing tricks on her or if something truly unnatural was happening. Her pulse quickened, and she took a step closer to the mirror. She stared at her reflection, at the figure behind her. There was no one there. Nothing at all in the real world. The shadow in the mirror grew darker, more pronounced. Something or someone was moving through the forest behind her. "Who's there?" Olivia called, her voice breaking through the silence. She didn't know if she expected an answer. She didn't expect anything to happen, but her hand was tight on her gun now. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching her. Olivia's mind raced. Was it someone she had been chasing all this time? Someone related to the syndicate? Or the man she had just spoken to at Emily's apartment? And then, the figure spoke. A voice low and raspy, echoing from the shadows. "You don't know what you've stumbled upon, Detective." Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the voice. It wasn't the man from the apartment or any of the people she had dealt with before. It was someone else entirely. Stepping slowly from the darkness into the dim light, a man appeared. A man she had never seen before. His face was unfamiliar, but there was a coldness to him, something almost haunting. His clothes were ragged, worn, and he had the look of someone who had been lost to time, someone who didn't belong in the world she knew. "I've been waiting for someone like you," he said, his voice soft, but filled with an unsettling finality. Someone to uncover the truth. Olivia's grip tightened on her gun. "Who are you?" she demanded, keeping her stance strong. "What truth?" The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "The truth about Emily's death, about the mirror, about what's really hidden here in these woods." Olivia's head spun. Emily's death? The mirror? She had been so focused on solving the case, on uncovering the pieces of the puzzle, that she hadn't even realized the real mystery had only just begun. The man smiled, his lips curling into a twisted grin. Emily Taylor, she was the key. She was the one who could have set everything free. But you, detective, you've uncovered more than you were supposed to. Olivia's mind raced. The key? What was this man talking about? And why was he talking like he knew Emily? "What are you talking about?" Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the fear growing inside her. Emily was just a girl. She didn't have any answers. She was just running from her past. The man shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "You have no idea, do you? Emily didn't just die, she was chosen." Olivia took another step back, her heart racing. "Chosen for what? Who are you?" The man didn't respond immediately. He simply stepped forward, closer to her, and for a split second, Olivia saw something strange in his eyes. Something far too ancient for a man who looked to be in his 30s. His eyes were like empty voids, as though they had seen countless lifetimes and witnessed the darkest corners of the world. Then, finally, he spoke again, his voice a whisper against the wind. "She wasn't meant to survive. Not after what she saw. The mirror is a portal, detective, and it's been waiting for someone to open it." Olivia's mind spun. A portal? She had thought she was dealing with a simple murder, one that involved a young woman's tragic end. But this was something else entirely. Before she could respond, the man moved quickly, his arm outstretched, grabbing her wrist with a strength that was inhuman. "You've opened it now. You've seen the truth, and now you will be part of it." Olivia struggled, but the man's grip tightened, pulling her closer. She felt a strange sensation surge through her body, as if the air itself was growing heavier. The trees around her seemed to bend, their branches reaching out like fingers, the shadows stretching unnaturally. "This is no longer your world," the man said, his smile widening. "This world was never meant to be. The mirror shows what was hidden, and what was hidden is far worse than you think." Olivia's mind raced, trying to grasp what was happening. The mirror, the journal, the strange man. It was all connected to something dark, something ancient. "Let go of me!" Olivia shouted, using every ounce of strength to break free. She struggled with everything she had, pushing against the man's hold, and for a moment, she thought she might succeed. But then, just as she was about to break free, she heard a loud crash. And then she saw it. The mirror. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. The surface of the glass was rippling, as if it were alive. And in it, Olivia could see something that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't just a reflection of the forest behind her. It was a glimpse into something else. A shadowy figure moved inside the mirror, its form shifting and growing. And then she realized what it was. It was Emily. Her face distorted, twisted in anguish, her eyes wide and staring into the mirror as though trapped in another world. "No!" Olivia cried out, her voice breaking. Emily! The figure inside the mirror seemed to reach out toward her, its hand outstretched, as if begging for help. But before Olivia could do anything, the man who had been holding her suddenly shoved her forward. The force sent her stumbling into the mirror. Olivia's heart raced as she tumbled into the mirror, the world around her warping and distorting with every passing second. It felt as though the ground beneath her feet was shifting, twisting, as though she were no longer in the forest at all, but in a place where reality no longer had any meaning. Her breath quickened as she tried to steady herself, but the strange sensation of disorientation gripped her with an iron fist. For a brief moment, everything around her was nothing but darkness. The air was cold, colder than she had ever felt before. And then, as if from nowhere, the world seemed to snap back into focus, but it wasn't the same world she had been in moments ago. The trees were gone. The cabin was nowhere to be found. Instead, Olivia stood in a room, an old, dimly lit room. She looked around, her eyes widening as she realized she was no longer outside in the forest. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and the wooden floors were covered in dust. The air felt stagnant, as though it had been trapped in this space for years. And then, as her eyes scanned the room, she saw it, the mirror. It was standing across from her, its surface perfectly smooth, but this time, it wasn't just reflecting her. Instead, the glass seemed to shift, showing flashes of images, moments frozen in time. Emily's face, her wide, terrified eyes, staring out from behind the mirror's surface. Olivia stumbled back, her breath hitching as she saw the figure of Emily trapped inside the glass. Her eyes were locked onto Olivia, and for the first time, Olivia saw something in those eyes that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Desperation. "Elise!" a voice echoed, but it wasn't her name. It was Emily's, her voice, but warped and distant, as though calling from the depths of a forgotten world. Olivia's heart thudded in her chest as she took a step closer to the mirror. There was no denying it now. Emily wasn't just dead. She had somehow become part of the mirror trapped in this world between worlds. The chilling realization hit Olivia like a brick. The mirror wasn't just a reflection of reality. It was a doorway to another dimension, to another plane of existence. "Emily," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling as she reached out toward the mirror. "What happened to you? What is this place?" The reflection in the mirror flickered, and for a moment, Olivia thought she saw Emily's lips move, but no words came out. The figure inside the mirror twisted, her body seemingly pulled into the glass, her arms outstretched as though begging for help. Olivia's heart clenched. There was no time to think. She needed to help Emily, to get her out of this prison of glass, to bring her back to the real world. But how? Without thinking, Olivia grabbed the edge of the mirror and tried to pull it toward her. Her fingers dug into the frame, the wood creaking beneath her touch. But no matter how hard she tried, the mirror didn't budge. It felt solid, impenetrable. She could feel something, a force pushing back, preventing her from making any progress. Frustration bubbled up inside her. "Let her go," she screamed, slamming her fists against the mirror, the impact rattling her bones. "I won't let you keep her here." But just as the words left her mouth, the room around her began to shake. The floor beneath her feet trembled, and the mirror rippled, as though something was stirring on the other side. Olivia stepped back, her heart racing as the reflection of Emily seemed to distort, her face contorting in pain. And then the mirror split. A crack ran down the center of the glass, splintering outward in jagged lines. The air turned cold, a suffocating chill creeping through Olivia's body as the world around her seemed to shift again. The room began to dissolve, the walls fading away into darkness. Olivia's instincts kicked in. She turned, stumbling backward, her mind racing to process what was happening. She was being pulled, dragged, into the mirror's realm. She could feel the pull of something otherworldly, like an invisible hand reaching out to claim her. Before she could even comprehend what was happening, the room around her collapsed into nothingness. When Olivia opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the room with the mirror. She was standing in a different place altogether, a forest, but it wasn't the one she had left behind. This was a place where the trees were impossibly tall, their gnarled branches twisting into the sky like fingers, reaching for something above. The ground was soft and damp beneath her feet, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. This was not the world she knew. This was something else. She looked around, her breath shallow, as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Where was she? And then she saw it. Just ahead, standing in the distance, was a figure, a silhouette. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she squinted, trying to make out who or what it was. The figure was tall, too tall, its body seeming to blend into the surrounding forest. And though she could barely make out any distinguishing features, she felt the sense that it was watching her, waiting. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaky, but loud enough to echo in the oppressive silence of the forest. "Show yourself." The figure didn't move, but then a voice, low, guttural, and far too familiar, came from the shadows. "You've come for her." Olivia's pulse quickened, recognition flooding her senses. It was the man, the one who had appeared in the clearing, the one who had trapped her in the mirror. She was sure of it now, but this time the voice was different. It was more distant, colder, as if it were coming from all around her. "You want to save her," the voice continued, "but you can never take her back. The mirror has claimed her, just as it will claim you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What is this place?" The figure began to move toward her, slowly, almost gliding across the ground. "You think you can stop it? The mirror is a doorway to truth, detective. But not the truth you think you know. The truth here is far darker. The mirror shows you what you're meant to see, but you're not ready for what lies behind it." Olivia's hands trembled at her sides as she took a step back, trying to process his words. She had to stay focused. She had to figure out a way to break free, to get Emily out of this place before it was too late. "You can't escape what's already been written," the voice said, its coldness sending chills down her spine. "This world is connected to the past, to everything that came before. The mirror reveals what has been hidden for centuries." "Who are you?" Olivia demanded. "What do you want from me?" The figure stopped just short of her, and for the first time, she saw its face, a distorted, empty mask, with eyes that reflected nothing but darkness. "I am the keeper of what was lost," it said. "The mirror is not just a window. It is a prison." And now you will understand. You will see the truth. Suddenly, the world around Olivia began to shift again, the trees around her bending as though they were alive, their limbs reaching toward her. The shadows deepened, and the figure in front of her seemed to grow taller, more monstrous. Olivia's heart thundered in her chest as she faced the distorted figure standing before her. The air around her grew thick with a suffocating presence, and the forest seemed to close in, the trees bending and swaying, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. The voice echoed in her ears, low and threatening, like a whispered secret from an ancient world. "I've seen enough," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the fear building within her. "I've been chasing this truth long enough, but this ends now." The figure before her only grinned, a twisted, hollow smile that sent shivers down her spine. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, seemed to consume the light around them, endless black voids that reflected nothing but emptiness. "You think you can stop it?" the figure crooned, its voice dripping with mockery. "This truth is older than you, detective. You're not the first to be drawn in, and you won't be the last." Olivia's grip on her gun tightened, her fingers steady despite the overwhelming dread swirling inside her. She had come this far, seen the lies and shadows that had haunted Emily, and now she would end this. There was no going back. She was no longer just trying to solve a murder. She was standing at the edge of something much darker, a truth that had been hidden for centuries. "I'm not afraid of you," Olivia declared, taking a step forward. "I've faced things much worse than this, and I will find a way to stop it." The figure's grin widened, but its voice softened, almost pitying. "You're already too late, detective. The mirror has shown you everything, and it has claimed what it was meant to claim." Before Olivia could respond, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The earth trembled, the trees creaking and groaning as though they were alive. The world around her seemed to blur, bending and warping like a dream slipping away. The figure remained motionless, watching her with an unreadable expression. And then, everything went still. The forest, the mirror, the figure, all of it faded into the darkness. Olivia was left standing alone, breathless, in the middle of nothingness. The silence was deafening. She looked around, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Suddenly, she felt a soft tug on her sleeve. "Detective Harris." Olivia whipped around, her eyes wide with shock. It was Emily. Her ghostly figure stood before her, her pale face filled with sorrow. Emily's eyes were locked onto Olivia's, filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. "You," Olivia stammered, stepping forward. "Is it really you?" Emily nodded slowly, her voice a faint whisper, like the wind through the trees. "I'm sorry, detective. I couldn't escape. I couldn't break free from the mirror." Olivia reached out, her hand trembling, but she couldn't touch her. Emily was like a wisp of smoke, her figure flickering in and out of existence. "The mirror," Olivia whispered, her mind reeling with everything that had happened. "What is this place? What happened to you?" Emily's face twisted in pain, but her voice remained calm. "It wasn't just a reflection. The mirror is a doorway, detective. A doorway to the past, to the hidden things that were never meant to be uncovered. I saw the truth, but I couldn't escape. And now it's your turn. You're the one who has to close it. You're the one who can stop it." Stop what? Olivia's voice broke. How do I close it? How do I fix this? Emily's figure flickered again, and her voice became more urgent. The mirror wasn't meant to be opened. It was never supposed to show the truth. The things you saw, the shadows, the twisted faces, they're not just reflections, they're what was hidden from the world. The things that were buried, the things that are still buried. Olivia's mind raced as she tried to make sense of Emily's words. The syndicate, the mirror, the shadows, they were all tied together, a web of lies and secrets that had festered for generations. But how could she close it? How could she stop something so much larger than herself? I'll do whatever it takes, Olivia said, determination filling her voice. I will close it. I will fix this. Emily smiled softly, but there was no joy in her expression. Only a deep, lingering sadness. I wish I could help you more, Detective. But you must understand, the truth is a dangerous thing. Once it's seen, there's no going back. The mirror will show you everything, and it will never let you forget. Emily's figure began to fade, her voice growing fainter as she spoke. Find the source. Find the one who created the mirror. And when you do, you'll know what to do. You're not alone, Detective. You've been chosen for this, but be careful. Once you see the truth, it will change you forever. And with that, Emily's image vanished, leaving Olivia standing alone in the emptiness. Olivia's heart raced as she stood in the fading light. Emily was gone. The figure, the keeper of the mirror, was gone. But the weight of the knowledge Emily had shared hung heavy on her chest. The truth had been revealed. But now it was up to Olivia to finish what had been started. She had to close the mirror. But where did she even begin? She stood there, in the stillness of the forest, trying to gather her thoughts. The mirror had shown her things she couldn't unsee, truths that were meant to stay buried. And the forest, the place where the past and present collided, had become her battleground. Olivia knew she couldn't leave this place. She couldn't let it consume her too. There had to be a way to stop the cycle, to sever the ties that had connected Emily to this dark force. The truth was out there, hidden in the forest, in the mirror, in the past. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. And then, in the distance, a faint light flickered through the trees. It was small at first, but as Olivia moved toward it, she could see it more clearly. A house, barely visible through the thick fog of the woods. It was a place she had to go. The source was close. Story 3. The convicted killer who claimed innocence. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, a silent hum that could be felt in the pit of every stomach. The trial had been dragging on for days, but today, the moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived, the closing arguments. Oliver Shaw, the man at the center of it all, sat in the defendant's chair, his hands clasped in front of him. His face was calm, his posture straight, but there was a tightness in his eyes, a flicker of something hidden beneath the stoic exterior. He had been convicted of the brutal murder of his wife, Sophia Shaw, a case that had captured the media's attention, with everyone from the press to the public certain that Oliver was guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. Sophia's blood-stained clothes had been found in the basement of their shared home. A knife with Oliver's fingerprints had been discovered next to her body. But Oliver insisted with every ounce of his being, that he had not killed her. His defense attorney, Rachel Wells, stood up in front of the jury, her heels clicking sharply on the courtroom floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and confident, "what we are asking you to do today is not just to look at the evidence, but to look at the bigger picture. Yes, the evidence is damning. Yes, it seems to point to my client, Oliver Shaw. But there are things that don't add up. There are inconsistencies. There are questions that remain unanswered." The jury watched intently, hanging on Rachel's every word. "You see, the real question is this. If Oliver Shaw is guilty, why has he maintained his innocence with such conviction? Why would a man facing a life sentence, knowing the evidence is stacked against him, insist on something that could make his situation even worse? Because the truth is, Oliver Shaw did not kill his wife. The evidence was planted. He is the victim of a conspiracy far bigger than any of us realized." The words hung in the air like a challenge, one that seemed to ripple through the courtroom. But as Rachel paused for effect, Detective Liam Carter, who had worked tirelessly on the case, watched from the back of the room, his jaw tight. He knew the truth, or so he thought. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was concrete. He had personally inspected the crime scene, questioned Oliver, and followed the trail that had led straight to him. But now, in this courtroom, Rachel was playing her hand. She was casting doubt, making the jury question everything they had believed about the case. The tension in the room deepened as Rachel continued. "We all want justice for Sophia Shaw, but we also have to ask ourselves if we are condemning an innocent man. Because if we convict Oliver, we are not only sentencing him to a life behind bars, we are sentencing ourselves to the guilt of condemning someone who may not deserve it." Rachel turned and gave Oliver a brief, almost imperceptible glance before continuing. "I ask you, members of the jury, to do one thing. Look at the evidence, yes, but also look at the man before you. Does he seem like a killer? Does he seem like a man capable of the crime he has been accused of? Or is there something more, something darker, that we are not seeing?" After the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for what felt like hours. As the courtroom doors opened and the judge took his seat, the tension reached its breaking point. "Will the jury please rise?" the judge called. The jury stood, their faces unreadable, and a long moment of silence stretched between them and the rest of the room. Detective Carter could feel his heartbeat in his throat. He had seen it all. The tears, the desperate claims of innocence, the confessions from family members of the accused. But this case was different. It was personal. He had spent years hunting for the truth, and yet, the more he dug into Oliver Shaw's life, the more he uncovered shadows of doubt. The person of the jury stepped forward, holding a slip of paper in her hand. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Oliver Shaw, guilty of the murder of Sophia Shaw." The room fell silent, the weight of the words hitting everyone like a punch to the gut. Oliver Shaw's face remained unreadable, though his jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with something between anger and relief. But Detective Carter felt no triumph. He had expected this verdict. He had believed in the case. But something gnawed at him. Something unsettled his gut. Was Oliver really guilty? Or was there more to this than he realized? Later that evening, in the dimly lit interrogation room, Detective Carter sat across from Oliver. The convict's hands were shackled, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, never wavered. Oliver leaned back in his chair, his face calm, his voice steady. "I didn't kill her, Detective, and I'm not lying. I swear to you, I didn't." Carter's frustration boiled over. He had listened to Oliver's claims of innocence for months, every word coming across as rehearsed, as if he had memorized his lines. "You think I'm just going to let you sit there and deny it all? The knife, the blood, the clothes? It's all right there, Shaw. You had every motive. She was going to leave you. You snapped. You killed her in a fit of rage, and now you're trying to twist it into some conspiracy." But Oliver didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes locked onto Carter's. "You think I killed my wife, Detective? But you don't have the full picture. You don't know who I was really dealing with. You don't know the real reason Sophia was killed." Carter's eyebrows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Someone else did this. Someone who wanted to ruin my life. Someone who knew about my past. Someone who knew that if they framed me, they'd get away with it." Olivia's voice was icy. "So you expect me to believe that you're innocent? After all the evidence? After everything you've said and done?" "Yes," Oliver said, his voice firm. "Because I'm telling you the truth. If you want the answers, Carter, you're going to have to look deeper. You're going to have to go back to the beginning." The next morning, Detective Carter decided to take Oliver's words seriously. Against his better judgment, he began to dig deeper into the case. His gut told him that something was wrong. He went back through the records, photographs of the crime scene, statements from family members, and the pile of evidence that had been presented at trial. He revisited Sophia's background. Sophia had been close to someone in her family, but that person had never been mentioned in the trial. He went back to the financial records, the ones Sophia had kept hidden in the secret drawer of her desk. What he found shocked him. There was an inheritance, a secret one. But more importantly, there was someone else involved in Sophia's life, someone who stood to gain a lot more from her death than Oliver did. As Carter pieced it together, he began to see the cracks in the story. This wasn't about Oliver Shaw. It was about a different killer, one who had been hiding in the shadows all along. Detective Carter stood still, staring at the stack of financial documents spread out on his desk. The more he looked at the numbers, the more pieces of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. His gut had been telling him there was something wrong with the case, and now he had confirmation. The story wasn't adding up. Sophia Shaw's financial records were a labyrinth of secrets. Hidden accounts, investments in companies that had questionable ties, and a significant life insurance policy. Carter's eyes narrowed as he scanned through the details. The beneficiary of the policy was listed as Thomas Shaw, Oliver's estranged brother, who had been completely absent from the entire investigation. Thomas Shaw. Carter recalled the name from the distant past. Oliver had mentioned him during the trial, but there had been no indication that Thomas had been involved in any way. He had been out of the country for years, living in South America according to the records. But now, the pieces seemed to fit together. If Thomas stood to gain from his brother's conviction and from Sophia's death, there was a motive. Carter's next stop was the Shaw family estate. He'd been to the mansion before, but today felt different. He needed answers. Thomas Shaw was the missing piece, and Carter knew that if he could find him, he might be able to uncover the truth behind Sophia's murder. The mansion was a grand, imposing structure perched on the edge of a hill, surrounded by lush gardens that looked as though they had been meticulously cared for. But today, it looked almost abandoned. The windows were dark, and there was a feeling of quiet foreboding in the air. Carter rang the doorbell, his shoes crunching on the gravel driveway as he waited. Moments later, a woman in her late 50s, wearing a conservative suit and a polite smile, opened the door. "Yes?" she asked, her tone calm, but her eyes scanning him carefully. "I'm Detective Liam Carter," he said, flashing his badge. "I'm here to speak with Thomas Shaw." The woman's eyes shifted, and for a brief moment Carter saw a flicker of hesitation. Then she stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "Please come in," she said softly. "I'm Mrs. Hargrove. I look after the estate. Mr. Shaw is not in town at the moment, but if you'd like to leave a message..." Carter's eyes narrowed. Something didn't feel right. "When is he expected to return?" Mrs. Hargrove paused before responding. "He hasn't been in touch with us for a while. He's difficult to reach." She hesitated again, and Carter could see that she was avoiding his gaze. Carter gave a polite nod, but something in his gut told him that Mrs. Hargrove wasn't telling him everything she knew. He thanked her for her time and left, but as he walked back to his car, the weight of his suspicions only grew heavier. The tension in the room felt like it was suffocating. Carter could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind remained razor sharp. Thomas Shaw, standing before him, had just confessed to the murder of his sister-in-law, Sophia. But this wasn't just a simple crime of passion. There was something deeper, darker, at play. "You think you've won, Detective?" Thomas continued, his smirk never wavering. "You've been chasing the wrong man all along. Everything I've done, everything I've planned, was for one purpose: to secure my family's legacy. And now, nothing stands in my way. Not you, not Oliver, no one." Carter clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He was done listening. It was time to put an end to this. He stepped forward, his voice steady, but filled with determination. "You won't get away with this, Thomas. I don't care how deep you've buried yourself in lies or how much you think you control. I'm bringing you down." Thomas didn't respond immediately. He simply turned toward the far wall, his eyes flicking to a small shelf where a framed photograph of Sophia and the rest of the Shaw family stood. His gaze lingered on it for a moment before he sighed, turning back to face Carter. "You still don't understand, do you?" Thomas said softly. "You think you can bring me to justice? But the truth is, Detective, it's already too late. The Shaw family's empire isn't something you can tear down. It's bigger than you, bigger than me." Carter's patience was wearing thin. "The empire you've built is built on lies, murder, and betrayal. And I'm going to expose every last bit of it." Thomas's smirk deepened, but his eyes darkened, filled with cold calculation. "You've already exposed enough. You've seen the evidence. Oliver is going to rot in prison for the rest of his life. And what will you have left? Nothing. The truth you've uncovered will stay buried, just like the rest of the Shaw family's secrets." For a moment, Carter considered his words, his mind working through the tangled web of lies and deceit that had brought him to this point. Everything was coming to a head. But it wasn't just about the murder anymore. It wasn't just about Thomas Shaw. It was about something far bigger, about the powerful people who had enabled this all along. It was about the people who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. "You can't hide forever," Carter said. "The truth always comes out one way or another." Thomas let out a low chuckle, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "You really think so? Maybe you're right, but not today." And just like that, Thomas lunged for the side table, grabbing a small, gleaming object that Carter didn't recognize at first. But before Carter could react, Thomas pressed the button on the object, and the room was flooded with a blinding light. Everything around Carter seemed to freeze in time, and then the world exploded into chaos. When Carter finally regained his bearings, the blinding light faded, and he found himself in an unfamiliar place. The room was dimly lit, and the air felt thick and heavy. He looked around, disoriented, and realized he was no longer in Thomas's villa. This was something else. The walls were covered in old tapestries, and the floor was made of polished stone, smooth and cold beneath his feet. A large desk stood in the center of the room, and behind it sat Thomas Shaw. But he wasn't the same. His eyes had changed. They were no longer the calculating, cold eyes of the man Carter had just faced. Instead, there was something eerie about them, something that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. His posture had shifted as well, more regal, more powerful. "Where am I?" Carter demanded, his voice shaking with confusion and fear. "What is this?" Thomas, or whatever he had become, smiled. "This is the real world, detective. The one you've been chasing all along. The truth you were never meant to find. Welcome to the House of Mirrors." Carter's heart skipped a beat as he processed the words. The House of Mirrors, the place where everything was manipulated, twisted, and distorted. This was no longer a simple murder case. This was something much bigger. "What the hell is going on, Thomas?" Carter demanded, his voice tight with disbelief. Thomas's grin widened, but it wasn't human. It was otherworldly. "The truth you've been chasing, it's all part of a game, detective. A game that's been played for centuries. The Shaw family, the Empire, the Mirror, it's all connected. You've been so focused on the surface, on the lies, that you never bothered to look deeper. You never saw the truth hiding beneath." Carter's mind raced as the words sank in. The mirror. The twisted reflection of reality. Everything started to piece together in his mind, but it didn't make sense. What was this place? What had happened to Thomas? "Where's Oliver?" Carter demanded, his gaze flicking back to Thomas. "What did you do to him?" Thomas chuckled darkly. "Oliver is a pawn, detective, a part of the game. He always has been. You think you've saved him, but he's already playing his part. Just like you are, just like I am." Carter's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" The walls seemed to pulse as if they were alive, and Thomas's figure flickered, distorting before Carter's eyes. "The truth is, detective, you've always been a part of this. You were never meant to expose the Shaw family's secrets. You were never meant to solve the case. You've been walking into a trap, one that's been laid for you, just like everyone else." Carter's blood ran cold as the weight of Thomas's words crashed down on him. He had been chasing a lie. He had been chasing a truth that had been twisted beyond recognition. And now, he was trapped. In the distance, Carter could hear the faint sound of footsteps, and he turned toward the door. It was open now, but all he saw was darkness. "Who's there?" Carter called, his voice rising in panic. A figure emerged from the shadows, and for the first time in his life, Carter's heart sank. It was Oliver Shaw, but he was different. His eyes were vacant, as if he were no longer the man Carter had known. He was no longer a person. He was a reflection, a shell. "Oliver?" Carter whispered, stepping forward. But Oliver didn't respond. He didn't even look at Carter. His gaze was fixed on Thomas, who was now standing beside him, a knowing smile on his lips. "The game is over," Thomas said softly, almost lovingly. "And you, detective, are the final piece." Carter's vision blurred as the realization hit him. He wasn't going to make it out of here, not unless he could escape this twisted version of reality, this house of mirrors. But it was too late. The trap had been set, and he had fallen right into it, the end.